It's time for a full chapter mind map, this time in the chapter about VLANs. So you know the drill. Watch enough of the video to get started, then pause and create your own mind maps. Then you can watch the rest of the video to compare yours to mine. All right, let's get into it. Your first step is to just make a list of all the terms that come to mind after thinking about the term VLAN or virtual LAN. So you can go ahead and do that right now. Now you can list terms, but if you can't think of the term but think of an idea, write as few as words as possible, a short description, not full sentences. Make that list, no particular order. You can go ahead and hit pause. I'll give you 5 seconds to hit pause before I tell you about the next step. Next step, you take the list that you just created and make a mind map. So what's a mind map? You write the seed term right down in the middle of a new piece of paper or in a mind map app, either way. And then you organize your terms. Say there are 3 terms that go together. You put those together somewhere and draw a line from the main term. Maybe there's 3 other terms that go together. You write them down somewhere else. Maybe there's some terms that you really don't know how to categorize them. You just stick them off to the side somewhere off the main term. You don't have to get this perfect. All right, this is just you to exercise your brain about how you're organizing them right now. It makes your brain think about these things. It'll make you curious about them. You'll want to go figure some things out. So I'll give you a few seconds to hit pause and go do that right now and make your mind map. So the countdown to pause and go do it. For phase 3 now, you can compare your mind map with the list of terms I've gotten from the chapter. So in the VLAN trunking and VLAN config chapter, these are the terms I put at the end of the chapter that are the key terms. That is the most important terms from that chapter. So you could scan your mind map and see if maybe you didn't think of some of the terms that I put in that chapter and update your mind map. So I'll give you a moment to hit pause and update, but I'm going to give you a second longer list here in just a second. So if you want to use this shorter list of the most important terms, now's the time to hit pause and go do that. And this list of additional terms, what I did was I looked at all the videos I created related to this chapter and I said, what are absolutely all the terms I think I might have mentioned? So it's all those in that previous page, its list, plus these terms. Now, that's a lot of terms. You may not want to go to all that trouble to put those in your mind map. But if you thought of some of these, you're thinking, I want a big, long list of terms. This is where you want to be. You're going to need more than 2 minutes just to type them in or write them down, all right? So give yourself 3 or 4 minutes for this. So I'll give you a moment to hit pause and go off and do the work. Next, I'm going to walk through my version of a mind map using the terms only from the key terms list in that chapter. Now, just as a reminder, these mind map exercises, it's about the exercise. It's about you doing it. So if you've just been watching the video, please pause and go do it. You don't learn as much watching my solution. Do it for yourself. Why is that? You're telling your brain what's important. You're telling your brain to think about these things. Even thinking of the terms forces you to think about what those terms mean. Organizing them forces you to think about how they relate to each other. You retrieve that from your brain only, and then you reorganize it, and that basically exercises how your brain stores things in long-term memory. It makes your long-term memories better. And the things that you're a little unsure about, it creates this kind of niggling bother in your brain where you just want to have the subconscious think about it, and you're going to end up Googling it and trying to figure out or go back and watch one of my videos and so on. So do the exercise. So here's what I came up with. And by the way, when I create these, I might add a few words that aren't key terms just to help organize my thoughts. Like defining isn't a key term. It's just a word I use to help organize things that are terms that help define what a VLAN is, like some of the concepts. Well, virtual LAN is what VLAN stands for. I might have even added the term LAN, local area network, in there if I wanted to, but I didn't. And I might have somewhere along the way mentioned the term broadcast domain, which refers to the idea that in a virtual LAN, any one device that sends a broadcast frame, that broadcast frame should be received by every other device in the VLAN. So over its history, broadcast domain was always kind of a defining term for what it means to be in a VLAN. The configuration for the VLAN itself, there was a VLAN command on a switch that creates the VLAN and an optional name subcommand in VLAN config mode that lets you override and choose a different name. And there was that one special VLAN called the default VLAN. It's VLAN number 1, and its default name, which also can't be changed, is default. All right. Now, some ports are meant to have only one VLAN associated with them, and we call those access ports. We also call them access interfaces, and the one VLAN associated with it is the access VLAN. Now, that's a normal access port with, say, a data device like a PC connected to it. Whereas there's a special type called a voice port where you connect an IP phone to the port, and then the IP phone connects to, say, a PC. And you need two VLANs, weirdly enough, and it's more like an access port than a trunk port. But the port used for traffic for the PC is called a data VLAN, and the VLAN used for the phone's traffic is called a voice VLAN. And those were some of the terms in that key term list. Now, if we've got an access port with one VLAN, or this oddball case of a voice port with two VLANs, a trunk port is one that supports all VLANs that are defined on the switch. So trunk supports all, and we would do that mostly between switches so they can forward traffic in between switches for all VLANs. Now, to configure a trunk port, you can configure that statically, just make it be a trunk, and there are instead a couple of dynamic options. That is, let's negotiate whether we want to act as a trunk or not between the two endpoints. There's also the ability just to configure a port to not use trunking, so not trunk equals access. So we call that a statically configured access port. Now, there was one term I really didn't find a good place to put it, so I gave it a category of miscellaneous. I didn't really have to, but that was layer 3 switch. It's in the list from the book. It didn't really seem to fit anywhere else to me, so there it is, out by itself. Now, there were a few other things about VLAN trunks, a few other terms. So what did I put there? Well, we had this idea of operational and administrative modes. That is, the administrative mode was what we configured about an interface in terms of whether we wanted it to trunk or not. And the operational mode was whether it is trunking or not. All right. And say there's a link that you want to be a trunk, then we want the operational mode to be trunking. So it's forwarding frames for all these VLANs, right? Other terms that have to do with VLAN trunks, the native VLAN, that one special VLAN for which frames in that VLAN, we don't add a trunking header. And what's that trunking header look like? Well, it's defined by the 802.1q standard that defines that extra 4 bytes of header that gets added to frames before they are sent over a trunk. See how doing this terminology mind map helps you review the concepts and review the terms along the way. And just to wrap it up, VLAN trunking protocol, or VTP, there's the acronym spelled out. And the key part of that are the VTP modes, which dictate how a switch is behaving in regards to VTP's job of letting you distribute VLAN configuration information, or, as we normally do for CCNA, ignore these updates about VLAN configuration information. Next, I'm going to walk through a mind map that I created where I started with the mind map I used previously. Then I added all those additional terms that I had thought of that I think I used in one video or the other here at the channel. So it's the much expanded list. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to focus on the ones that I think I added to make this bigger mind map rather than repeat talking about the ones that were in the first smaller mind map. All right. I'm going to go around the horn starting in the upper right, just like I did before. And in fact, in the defining area, there's nothing new there. I didn't add any terms up there. And at access ports, I added IP phone. That's a term that wasn't in the original list, but it's a phone that uses TCP/IP to communicate. And then pseudo trunk was my term, not Cisco's term, for that voice port, the behavior of having two VLANs on the link. So it's more than an access port, but it's less than a full trunk port for that idea. And I think I might not have had the term access link in the earlier mind map as well. So access link being a link that's supporting only one VLAN, and it's not a trunk. Now, trunk versus access, I didn't add anything there. I did add one term down here in the miscellaneous area. VLAN hopping, that's that case where you've got a trunk and you have a mismatch of the native VLAN configuration, where if a frame comes in and it needs to be forwarded in the native VLAN on the left, it's sent without a tag because it's in the native VLAN. When it arrives on the right, the other switch says, hey, there's a different VLAN ID that's the native VLAN, so the frame migrates over to another VLAN. That's a bad thing. All right. Now, most of the new terminology is on the left in the VLAN trunk and VTP area from that big long list that I had a few moments ago here in the video, so let's walk through it. So operational mode I had in there before, but I use the term operational trunk oftentimes in the video, so it's a link that's operating as a trunk. We talked about 802.1q. We had that term in the earlier briefer mind map, but there's an 802.1q header. That term just refers to that 4-byte header defined by the 802.1q standard. And more like familiar jargon, the term VLAN tagging refers to the idea of taking a frame that doesn't have that header and before sending it out over a trunk, inserting that extra 4-byte header. So we're tagging the frame with this extra header. Now, DTP, the acronym, stands for Dynamic Trunking Protocol, and that's the Cisco proprietary protocol that Cisco switches use between each other to negotiate whether they want to choose to trunk or not. And that's used when you've got switches that use options like Dynamic Desirable and Dynamic Auto in their configuration that dictates whether they want to try to use trunking and whether they succeed at negotiating that. Other things here, the VLAN list. So if you do a show interfaces trunk command on a switch, and what you'll see is 4 groups of messages. The first is status, and then there are 3 sets of VLAN lists, and it goes from the broadest list to a little narrower list to a little narrower list. So in those VLAN lists, you'll see defined VLANs mentioned. Those are the VLANs for which there's a VLAN configuration for that VLAN on the switch. Active VLANs, that means those that are not shut down. So we have terms about active VLANs and the shutdown of a VLAN. And we've got this idea of an allowed VLAN list. That's the first of those 3 lists in that show command, where we say, hey, which VLANs do I, via configuration, want to allow to cross this trunk, because I may not want to allow all VLANs to cross a trunk. All right, so that's the important substance. Now, if you wanted to know more about VTP, well, at least I mentioned some of those terms in one of the videos. So we've got VTP. I had mentioned VTP mode before, but down here at the bottom, I added the 4 modes of server, client, transparent, and off to the list. In the VTP video, I also mentioned standard and extended mode VLANs and the ranges of those. I mentioned how that when you're using VTP as server or client, you store the devices, the switches, store the VLANs in a file that's by default called VLAN.dat, like VLAN data, and it's in flash memory rather than storing the config in the running config file. And we talked about this feature briefly called VTP pruning. Whew, that's a lot of terminology, right? But you can see how effective it might be if you took your time and thought about, well, what were all the terms I heard and learned about in these videos? Hopefully you got something out of the exercise when you did it. Leave me a comment and let me know what you thought about it. I hope you enjoyed this terminology mind map video for an entire chapter. If you're thinking, I'm ready for the next topic, click on the left and you'll be brought to the next instructional video in sequence about spanning tree protocol. If you're thinking, I want more about VLANs and VLAN trunking, click on the right and you'll be brought back to one of those instructional videos. Hey, thanks for hanging out. I'll talk to you soon.